I want you to imagine this morning that we are going to plot a line of the history of Earth from the steps of the planetarium outside of Dallas in Mesquite, Texas, okay, all the way to this, where I'm standing in this pulpit right now. We're talking 3 to 4 billion years of history that we're going to plot along this line, about 250 miles. So we're talking about 250 years an inch, approximately. So I want to thank my colleague, Reverend Dr. Forrest Church, who first came up with this and wrote about this idea in his book called Lifecraft some years ago. But in his case, he plotted the line from Cambridge, Massachusetts to his church, which was All Souls in Manhattan on the Upper West Side of New York City. So his line had a few more distinguished plot points, like Harvard University. They had, let's see, Yankee Stadium and the Statue of Liberty. But we have a few things between here and Dallas. We have downtown Okmulgee. You know, come on, give it up. We have Turkey Mountain. And we have, of course, we have the prayer tower at Oral Roberts University. So not to be outdone, not to be outdone. So if you can imagine this physical continuum, we begin on the steps of the planetarium with the Paramecium, the first primeval protoplasm. And then you're going to have to walk really fast, maybe hitchhike, get a ride in the car, because you're going to have to go through Fort Worth, past Plano, across the Red River, by Lake Texoma. You're going to have to, let's see, past the Love's Rest Stop in Durant, Oklahoma, the prison in McAllister. Just keep going, past the Choctaw Casino, through Henrietta, through Jenks, until you're going to arrive at Oral Roberts University here in Tulsa. And that's where the first amphibian would emerge from out of the waters. Somewhere, I've done the math on this, somewhere between the left forearm and the right forearm of the praying hands. And then, on your way here, you'd wait till you got to the Lubies on 71st Street. Would be when the first birds and mammals would start to emerge. No, we're going to come down Peoria, though. I know you could go Riverside, but I had to. There aren't enough plot points on Riverside, so we're at the 71st and the Lubies there at 71st. You got the first birds and mammals are emerging, and now these furry and flying creatures will share the earth with the dinosaurs for a little while, when the dinosaurs come on the scene at 65th in Peoria and die out at 61st. All right? Now, monkeys would not show up until we reached the Brahms on 51st Street. And even by the time you reach the door of this church, the most sophisticated creature that you would bump into would be the chimpanzee. And then when you entered the sanctuary, as you did this morning, you'd be greeted by a Neanderthal. No offense to the current ushers. And now you'd have to make your way all the way down this aisle, all the way to the front pew, where Nikki's sitting, the birthday girl, before you get to the first Homo sapien. Remember, we started in Dallas. And then you have to get to the 14,000 years of recorded history. 14,000 years starts right here. 2 steps from the pulpit. All of recorded history of humanity that we know of. I think, right, let's see, right in the middle of this step, you'd get to King Tut. Okay, you following? 2 inches away from my foot is where Europeans would discover America. And 1 inch away is when the Declaration of Independence was penned. 1/2 an inch away is when Darwin came up with the theory of evolution. And 1/3 of an inch away is when there was the invention of the airplane. 1/3 of an inch. And it was on this tiny piece of dust, which is on my shoe, which you can't see, which really we know from science is not really on my shoe. There's a microcosmic little space there. It's in that space that Al Gore invented the internet. or whoever invented the internet. And it was on that, in that space between that piece of dust and my shoe that the Hubble telescope started to send us pictures of the outer reaches, maybe not even the outer reaches of our galaxy. So think about all that's just happened in the last 2 inches of this journey. 2 inches in is when Copernicus finally figured out that the Earth is not the center of the universe. When, as I said, when Europeans discovered the Americas, it's nothing short of amazing that in the millions of steps that it would take to walk from Dallas to right here, the entire sweep of human history would happen between this top step and the pulpit. All technology, all theology, all philosophy, all literature, all music, all science would be contained in those last 2 strides toward the pulpit. And yet, most religions are based on the idea that the universe begins and ends with the sole purpose of human life. And much of the Christianity that we know about here in the Bible Belt teaches that the penultimate event happened 8 inches ago when Jesus Christ was born. And in some churches they teach that about 8 inches later, sometime, anytime now, it's all going to end. And that in that 8 inches is where all the substance and significance of life supposedly happens. In other words, billions of people worldwide are completely fixated on the last 8 inches of this journey in their religious thinking and in their understanding of who they are and what life is. Now, the religion and the cosmology here at All Souls is much, much more expansive, spanning and taking into account the entire journey of over 200 miles. And even further, we'd go into the planetarium and we'd learn about the stars and the billions upon billions upon billions of years that existed in time before Earth was ever created. The contrast in terms of theology and cosmology between what we are talking about and considering here compared to a lot of places could not be more different. And if you're visiting today and you're looking for a place of values for your family that takes into account the entire span of time, then you're in the right place. And we hope that you find here, I hope that you find here a community, a connection, a place for your family, a place for your kids, not a place of fear, not a place that's going to fill their heads with superstition, not a place that's going to blind them with 8 inches of life's history and tell them that's the only part that matters, but one that is going to take into consideration the entire sweep of billions of years of time. But before we become too self-congratulatory, which we are known to do, let us be clear that this does not mean those of us who have a more expansive worldview or cosmological view or theology are any less ignorant about what all this means, or any less ignorant about how all this came about than those whose ignorance is contained within those 8-inch blinders. Like Socrates, who said about himself that he was the most ignorant man in Athens in his time, although he was by far the most knowledgeable person. It was because he knew so much that he recognized how little he actually knew. So in the words of Forest Church, we on this planet are much more alike in our ignorance than we are different in what we think we know. And that brings me to my subject for this morning, which is humility. The name of my sermon is Facing Change. And one of the keys to facing change well is humility. As much as people dislike change, everybody says they hate change, or we're told that everybody hates change, we live in a world in which the only thing that is constant is the fact that everything's always changing. I mean, what a cruel joke to be alive in a world of perpetual change and have the disposition of wanting things to be stable. And one of the things that is undisputable about the history that I'm talking about is that the pace of change continues to get faster and faster and faster and faster. I mean, think about just in that last half an inch since the airplane was invented. We've gone to the moon. We have cell phones and internets and all the Hubble telescope. All that stuff's happened in this last little bit of time. So it keeps speeding up. And so look around. America's changing. The Middle East is changing. Religion is changing, or it should be changing as we learn more. Religion has to adapt and recognize as we learn more. We can't just wall ourselves off from the world and science and everything that we're learning and say, oh, none of that matters. I'm just going to stick with what I've been told and what I believe. So science is changing. Constantly we're hearing new things about science. I can't even figure out what to eat anymore. I don't know whether I'm supposed to be gluten-free, low carb, high fiber, or low fiber, high protein. Because every week it feels like I read an article and it's all changed. Whether I'm supposed to eat eggs or not eat eggs in the morning. I can't figure it out. But we're all changing. Our capacities are changing. Our physical attributes are changing. We're getting older. At least you all are getting older. We face loss of loved ones in our lives, and it changes so much. And our jobs change. Our children grow up. They go to college or go into the military or go off into living somewhere else. Our relationships bend and break and disintegrate, and people give up on them. And so a key part of the human condition is figuring out how to be alive, knowing that we will die, and finding a way to face change without being defeated. A writer, Bo Lazoff, says that when facing change, our choice is often between defeat or humility. In his book, It's a Meaningful Life, he tells a story about when he was 18 years old. He fell asleep while driving on this lonely stretch of highway in his little compact car. He had a high-speed head-on collision with a tractor-trailer. He fractured his skull. He crushed a disc in his spine. He ruptured his spleen. And he took most of the glass from the windshield into his face. He says that he was pulling glass shards out of his face for 2 years as they made their way to the surface of the skin. His life suddenly stopped. Everything he knew, everything he was doing. And he realized that this kind of setback was either going to defeat him or define him, but what it was going to take was humility. And so he discovered that that is the difference that makes a difference a lot of times in our lives is, can we face change with humility? He said being humbled for him meant that the shock and the pain and the years of recuperation opened him up rather than shut him down. It made him more compassionate and more understanding rather than more bitter and more afraid. Being defeated would have involved shutting people out, wallowing in self-pity, and becoming more demanding and more angry. We all know people We've seen people do that. Many of us have done it ourselves. You may be doing it right now. I'm sure that you know from your own experience that it's very easy to turn our fear and our hurt into anger when we face difficult situations. He says, for some reason, lying in that hospital bed with tubes coming out of every orifice on his body, that it softened him into humility rather than hardening him into anger. And as I read his story, I was reminded of a time in my life when I was going through incredible grief and a huge transition. And somebody recommended to me, great advice. They said, you need to take up something new, something different, something that's not easy for you, something that's not intuitive for you, and try to learn it. And so I decided to try to learn African drumming. And I have to tell you, I couldn't keep a beat to save my life. I felt like an uncoordinated dork of some kind. Just like I couldn't even figure out how to keep a beat. So the question, and I realized, I felt so awkward, and I was like, why does this, number one, feel so familiar, and number two, feel so far away? Because I had not felt that way for a long time in my life. And I realized that at some point in my life, I chose to only do the things that I'm good at, only do the things that came easy for me. And if something I started and it wasn't going to be easy, I just turned away. I'll tell you a story about when I was in graduate school. I thought I'd be a martial artist. I thought that'd be really something cool to be a martial artist. And so I never became one. I married one, but I didn't become one. So she could protect me when I'm, out. But it was very hard for me. I felt so uncoordinated. I mean, all these different moves and postures and things, and I just couldn't get my feet to go in the right direction, and my hands at the same time as my feet, and all this stuff, and I just felt like I was the most uncoordinated, awkward person. And yet I could see these other people, some of them half my age, who were so smooth and just beautiful and truly amazing what they could do. And I realized, man, I have such a long way. I could be doing this for like 10 years and not even be close to some of these folks who were so young in different circumstances. I felt like I was the little man on the totem pole, and I did not like it. I was the rookie. I was the beginner. There were guys and gals in there. Not only were they half my age, some of them, they had very little life experience. Some of them had very little formal education. Some of them were working dead-end jobs. And I'm going to tell you something. I'm not proud of this. But I want to, if I'm going to be honest, I have to admit that some of these people, at that time in my life, some of these people, if I were to see them in another arena, I would feel superior to them. I would look down on them. There were guys there who were working in gas stations. I was studying at Harvard. I thought I was something. These guys were laughing at me, like, look at the Harvard guy over here trying to do it. So I quit. My ego could not take it. It was way too fragile to handle that kind of situation. I was just starting to feel like I was reaching a level of success in my life, a sense of dignity and sophistication and all these kinds of things. And so I realized that my ego was way too fragile to deal with that kind of situation, so I gave up. And I realized that that's when it happened. In my mid-20s, I started not doing anything that was going to be too difficult for me. I stopped putting myself in situations where I'd be the bungling beginner, where I would be awkward and unsure. And I've come to see that that is quite typical for all of us in different ways in our lives, or for many of us. But here's the thing about being a beginner, is that it brings great humility and great instruction into our lives. For me, taking up drumming at a time of incredible grief and transition reminded me that I'm human. It reminded me of what it's like to be a child. It reminded me, in essence, of who I am. In the Bible, in Matthew chapter 18, it says, the disciples they're arguing, as they were always doing, disputing, and so they decided to go to Jesus, and they asked, who then is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? Verse 1, chapter 18. Jesus said, Jesus called a little child to him, and he placed the child among them, and he said, "Truly I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever takes the lowly position of the child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven." I often struggled with that, and it was really as I was putting this together that I finally think I understood at least some part of what that means. And it is that we have to remember what it was like to be a child, because children are open. They're open to learning. They know they don't know everything. They're trusting in all these different ways. We can't get to the kingdom of heaven. We can't get to the promised land in our lives. We can't get to full relationships, success in jobs, all those kinds of things, unless we can go back and remember what it's like to be a child and be that humble and that human in our interactions. And sometimes what that takes is trying something new and sticking with it even when it's hard, because there's nothing that reminds you of how human you are than trying something brand new. The root of the word human is the same root as the word humility and humane and humanitarian and humor and humus. Humus. The decomposed plant and animal matter that makes up the soil. Ultimately and eventually, we will all become food and homes for terrestrial worms. Humus. We are humus in the making. From stardust we have come, and to dust we shall return. And it's good to remember this so that we can keep our sense of humor, so that we can take our lives lightly. Now, it's very different from humiliation. Humiliation robs people of their self-respect. Humiliation comes from somebody like I was when I thought I was superior to these other people because of their job or because of their education or whatever that was. People try to humiliate other people. Humiliation it robs people of trust. It robs people of hope. But humility says, I still have a lot to learn. Humility says, sometimes I need to ask others for help. And that's okay. Realizing that I may not know even what I need right now, and I need to trust somebody who I care about and who cares about me to help me. And the beauty of humility is it allows us to go beyond our own limitations. Humility allows us to go beyond our own limitations because we realize that we do not have to depend just on our own resources. We've got others who we can trust and depend on, and they help move us past the little that we're able to accomplish only on our own. Humility allows us to laugh at ourselves. It allows us to realize that we are as funny and as fallible as everybody else, and that's okay. It allows us to be learners. It encourages us to let go of things that we don't have any control over anyway. And therefore, humility empowers hope and trust. Humility is free of contempt. Humility is patient and kind. May you be patient and kind with yourself. That's why one of the keys of navigating change, one of the keys of a successful life, beyond prayer and spiritual practice, beyond coming to church, beyond trying to read and better your mind and better yourself, one of the keys to successfully navigating change in our lives is humility. One of the keys to successful relationships is humility. That's why Jesus talks about it. You read about it in the scriptures of Moses. Even the Buddha, I studied Buddhism for a while in Asia, he talks about having the child's mind, keeping the child's mind, just like Jesus talked about children, having the mind of a child and the temperament of a child to allow us to reach the kingdom of heaven. My point, we are neither the center of the universe or the purpose of creation. Yet we are alive, and the expanse of the human mind and the mysteries of God and spirit and religion are so incredible and so amazing. But let us remember that we are more alike in our ignorance than we are indifferent in what we think we know. If you're encountering other people with other religious beliefs in your lives, and there's this hard wall, this defensive, deflective kind of relationship, see if you can move towards humility, recognizing, yeah, you think that, I think this. Quite frankly, all we really are two tiny pieces of dust sitting on the edge of a big rock that is floating in infinite space, arguing as if we know what all this is about and why it's here. When the best thing we can do is try to live humbly, walk humbly with our God in the way of our understanding, treat people well, love our neighbors as ourselves. If we can, as Jesus said, love our enemies too. It's a high charge. But if we can get through this life with a little dignity left and a few friends at the end of the road, we're doing really, really well. May you find the humility of the human spirit, the humility that every religion tells us God asks us to be. In fact, think about this. The story of Christ is a story of God entering the world as a little baby. Imagine God trusting himself to some poor mother in some outskirt town far away from Jerusalem. Poor. I know what it's like to raise my own kids. It's scary sometimes. Am I going to do the right thing? Am I going to take care? Am I giving them the right thing? God put according to the Christian story, God put his life in the hands of a poor family and a poor young teenage mom and allowed her to raise him. There's no greater act of humility, an example of humility upon which we could model our lives than the one that's been presented to us in Jesus, in the Bible. So even if we're not fixated completely on those last 8 inches of history, we still have a lot to learn. And the best way to do that is to keep our hearts and our minds open in humility and love so that we too can walk humbly and live a meaningful life. God bless you. Amen.